August 29th, 2005. A Category 3 hurricane makes landfall near Buras, Louisiana, driving a 28-foot wall of water into the Gulf Coast. Within hours, 80% of New Orleans is submerged. More than 1,800 people died. The storm caused over $125 billion in damage. Hurricane Katrina became the deadliest disaster in modern American history, not because of what the storm did, but because of what was supposed to stop it. At 6:10 in the morning Central Daylight Time on August 29, 2005, Hurricane Katrina struck the Louisiana coast near Buras. The storm arrived as a Category 3 hurricane, packing sustained winds of 125 miles per hour and a central pressure measured at 920 millibars. Early morning advisories from the National Hurricane Center warned of catastrophic conditions, but the true scale of the threat would not be clear until the surge began to rise. Within minutes of landfall, the Gulf Coast was battered by a wall of water. Tide gauges at Bay St. Louis and Gulfport recorded a peak storm surge of 28 feet above normal sea level, the highest ever measured along the Mississippi coastline. The shallow shelf off the coast funneled water inland, amplifying the surge as it moved through bays and into low-lying neighborhoods. Along the Mississippi Sound, the water reached homes and businesses with a force that swept entire structures from their foundations. The storm's wind field extended for miles, but it was the surge, driven by the hurricane's size and the shape of the coastline, that delivered the most destructive blow. In less than an hour, entire stretches of the Gulf Coast disappeared beneath the advancing water. The surge overtopped seawalls, destroyed marinas, and left debris fields that stretched for miles inland. While wind damage was severe, it was the relentless push of saltwater that tested every line of defense, from engineered levees to natural wetlands. These defenses, designed for smaller storms and lower tides, faced a force beyond their limits. The true test of the region's infrastructure had arrived. Floodwaters poured into New Orleans with a force and scale that overwhelmed the city's defenses. By the end of August 29th, nearly 80% of New Orleans was submerged. The lower Ninth Ward, Lakeview, and Gentilly filled rapidly, with water rising to rooftops in some areas within hours. Streets vanished beneath 6 to 12 feet of water. The lower Ninth Ward, already among the city's poorest neighborhoods, was hit especially hard after the Industrial Canal levee broke, sending a torrent through homes and businesses. In Lakeview, the breach at the 17th Street Canal unleashed millions of gallons into residential blocks, leaving entire communities stranded. Survivors climbed into attics or onto rooftops, waiting for help that often took days to arrive. Elderly residents faced the greatest peril, and many who could not evacuate or escape rising water were later found in their homes. The death toll in Louisiana and Mississippi would eventually range from 1,400 to 1,833. Mississippi alone lost over 200 lives, most swept away by the surge that erased whole coastal towns. In New Orleans, the majority of victims were over 60 years old, a stark reminder of the vulnerability of those with limited means and mobility. The economic toll matched the human scale of loss. Federal and state assessments placed the damage between $108 billion and $125 billion. More than 300,000 homes across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama were destroyed or left uninhabitable. In the span of a single day, entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath the water, their residents scattered, and their futures uncertain. The devastation reached far beyond property, cutting into the social fabric of the Gulf Coast. The devastation in New Orleans did not come from the storm alone, but from the collapse of the very defenses meant to keep the city safe. More than 50 breaches tore through the levee and floodwall system, an engineering failure on a scale rarely seen in United States history. The United States Army Corps of Engineers, responsible for the city's flood protection, had relied on design standards and construction practices that underestimated the threat posed by both the water and the ground beneath it. At the heart of the catastrophe was the 17th Street Canal. Here, the flood wall was anchored by steel sheet piles driven only 10 to 12 feet into soft, peaty soil. The original design assumed a stable foundation, but post-storm investigations revealed thick layers of weak, highly compressible peat, far more susceptible to movement than the engineers had calculated. As Katrina's surge pushed water levels to 11.1 feet, the pressure on the wall exceeded its limits. Scour at the base, caused by overtopping water, stripped away protective backfill and exposed the sheet piles. The wall buckled outward and ruptured, opening a breach that funneled millions of gallons into the Lakeview neighborhood within minutes. This was not an isolated failure. Across the city, shallow sheet piles and overconfident assessments of soil strength left the entire system vulnerable. IPET and ASCE reviews found the same flaws at dozens of sites: insufficient foundation depth, inadequate geotechnical investigation, and a lack of safety margins for settlement and subsidence. These were not acts of nature, but preventable errors in judgment and oversight. The verdict from engineers, both inside and outside the Corps, was clear. This was one of the worst civil engineering failures in United States history. The consequences would set the stage for a second disaster: the breakdown of emergency response in the days that followed. Federal agencies had years to prepare for a hurricane of Katrina's scale, yet the emergency response faltered at every level. As floodwaters rose, the Federal Emergency Management Agency struggled to coordinate rescue and relief. Search and rescue teams arrived in New Orleans only after most neighborhoods were already underwater. The Superdome, intended as a shelter of last resort, filled beyond capacity with over 20,000 people. Within 2 days, food and water ran out, toilets backed up, medical supplies dwindled, and the heat inside became unbearable. At the nearby convention center, thousands more gathered, expecting help. For 4 days, they waited without official aid. No meals, no medicine, no evacuation plan. Elderly residents and families with children slept on concrete floors, surrounded by garbage, while rumors of violence and disease spread through the crowd. Outside, survivors clung to rooftops, waving makeshift flags at passing helicopters. Coast Guard logs recorded hundreds of rooftop rescues, but many people waited days for any sign of help. The city's patchwork of flooded streets and broken communications left entire neighborhoods cut off. Cell towers failed, and local agencies could not reach federal officials. At the height of the crisis, President Bush praised FEMA Director Michael Brown, saying, "Brownie, you are doing a heck of a job." The comment, broadcast nationwide, quickly became a symbol of government detachment from the suffering on the ground. In the aftermath, FEMA's own after-action reports cited confusion, poor logistics, and lack of leadership. Michael Brown resigned under pressure less than a year after the storm. The breakdown in emergency response revealed not just a failure of planning, but a system unprepared to protect its most vulnerable citizens. The ordeal inside the shelters and on the rooftops exposed a deeper truth. The disaster was not only natural, but man-made. Roughly 400,000 New Orleans residents were forced from their homes in the aftermath of Katrina. The city's population, once 455,000, dropped below 230,000 within a year. This mass displacement did not affect all communities equally. Neighborhoods with higher poverty rates and predominantly Black residents faced the greatest barriers to evacuation. Census studies show that only about a quarter of low-income households owned a car, compared to more than 2/3 in wealthier areas. When buses and trains failed to materialize, thousands were left behind. Those who could not escape before the storm, often the elderly, the disabled, and families with young children, endured days trapped in flooded homes or crowded shelters. The disaster laid bare the consequences of long-standing inequalities. Access to transportation, safe housing, and recovery resources was sharply divided along lines of race and income. The scars of this forced migration would shape New Orleans for years to come. In New Orleans East, Vietnamese American community leaders moved quickly after the waters receded. Within days, they organized volunteers, pooled donations, and worked through church networks to clear debris and repair homes. By early 2006, many families had returned, jump-starting local businesses and reopening schools before federal aid arrived. Their story stands as proof that solidarity and self-reliance can speed recovery even when official help lags behind. Meanwhile, Congress passed the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act in 2006, overhauling FEMA and requiring stronger coordination for future disasters. The federal government committed $14 billion to rebuild and upgrade New Orleans levees, raising engineering standards and installing new storm pumps. Yet the memory of Katrina remains a warning. Climate scientists now point to the storm as an early sign of the rising risks facing coastal cities, urging that lessons in resilience and preparedness must not be forgotten. Today, millions still live behind levees rebuilt by the same institutions that once failed them. As climate threats grow and inequality deepens, the lessons of Katrina remain unfinished business. The next storm will test what, if anything, America has truly learned. Share your perspective in the comments below.